CEO hated street children and kicked them away, until homeless girl prayed over her dying husband and he miraculously recovered. What she discovered next will shock you. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more miraculous stories. The bitter December wind cut through downtown Chicago as Sophia Montgomery stepped out of her black Mercedes, her designer heels clicking against the frozen pavement. At 28, she commanded her luxury restaurant empire, Montgomery's Crown, with an iron fist that had never known mercy. "Get that filthy creature away from my establishment." Sophia's voice pierced the morning air like a blade. A small girl, no more than 7, had been quietly gathering scraps from the dumpster behind the flagship restaurant. The child's torn coat hung loosely on her frail frame, her bare hands red from the cold. "Please, ma'am, I'm just hungry," the little girl whispered, clutching a moldy piece of bread. Sophia's emerald eyes blazed with disgust. "Security. Remove his pest immediately. These vermin are destroying my restaurant's reputation." Her security. Guards hesitated, uncomfortable with the harsh order, but none dared question their ruthless boss. The child fled into the snowy streets, disappearing like a ghost among the bustling Chicago pedestrians. Sophia smoothed her perfectly tailored Armani coat and marched into her restaurant, her staff avoiding eye contact. She had built her empire on perfection, control, and the complete elimination of weakness from her world. Her employees whispered among themselves, disturbed by their boss's cruelty, but fear kept them silent. Sophia had fired countless workers for far less than questioning her methods. She ruled through intimidation and calculated coldness. In her luxurious penthouse office on the top floor, crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows as Sophia reviewed profit reports with satisfaction. Montgomery's Crown had become Chicago's most exclusive dining destination, serving only the wealthy elite. She had clawed her way from middle-class obscurity to become one of the city's most powerful businesswomen. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. Her assistant's trembling voice delivered news that would change everything. "Mrs. Montgomery, your husband collapsed at the architecture firm. He's being rushed to Chicago General Hospital." For the first time in years, Sophia's mask of control cracked. Daniel, her gentle, compassionate husband who constantly questioned her treatment of the less fortunate, was her only weakness. The one person whose opinion mattered. She abandoned her empire and raced through the hospital corridors, her heart pounding with a terror she'd never experienced. The pristine white walls seemed to close in as she ran, designer heels echoing against sterile floors. Something deep inside whispered that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Sophia burst through the emergency room doors, her breath visible in rapid puffs as panic consumed her normally composed demeanor. The sterile hospital. Smell hit her like a wall, mixing antiseptic with fear and desperation. She'd never felt so powerless in her entire life. "Daniel Montgomery, where is he?" she demanded at the reception desk, her voice cracking despite her efforts to maintain control. The nurse directed her to room 314. Sophia's heels clicked frantically down the endless hallway, each step echoing her mounting dread. When she pushed open the door, her heart nearly stopped. Daniel lay pale and weak against the white sheets, his usually vibrant brown eyes dulled with exhaustion. "Sophie," he whispered, using the nickname only he was allowed to say. His architectural hands, which had drawn countless beautiful buildings, trembled as he reached for her. I'm here, she breathed, grasping his hand like a lifeline. For a moment, the Ice Queen vanished, replaced by a terrified wife watching her world. Collapsed. Dr. Harrison entered with a grave expression that spoke volumes before he uttered a word. The renowned oncologist had delivered countless devastating diagnoses, but something about this young couple's love made his task particularly difficult. "Mrs. Montgomery, please sit down," he said gently. Just tell me, Sophia snapped, her defenses rising like armor. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Money is no object. Dr. Harrison's weathered face showed deep compassion. Mr. Montgomery has pancreatic cancer, stage 4, with metastasis to the liver and lungs. The tumor is aggressive and has spread extensively. The room spun around Sophia. Her empire, her control, her carefully constructed life meant nothing in the face of this invisible enemy, destroying the only person she'd ever truly loved. How long? Daniel asked quietly, squeezing Sophia's hand. With aggressive treatment, perhaps 3 months. I'm truly sorry. No, Sophia's voice rose dangerously. Absolutely not. I want second opinions, third opinions. I'll fly in specialists. From Europe, from anywhere. I'll spend every penny I have. Daniel watched his wife spiral into the familiar pattern of trying to control the uncontrollable. Sophie, sometimes we have to accept. Never. She interrupted. I didn't build an empire by accepting defeat. I'll transform this entire floor into a private treatment center if necessary. Over the following days, Sophia did exactly that. She hired the nation's top oncologists, flew in experimental drugs from Switzerland, and converted a luxury suite into a command center. Phone calls to medical facilities worldwide consumed her days while Daniel grew weaker. But every specialist delivered the same crushing verdict. The cancer was too advanced, too aggressive. All their cutting-edge treatments could only provide comfort, not cure. Sophia's desperation transformed into cold fury. She fired nurses for minor infractions, screamed at doctors for their incompetence, and became increasingly vicious toward anyone who dared suggest preparing for the inevitable. Mrs. Montgomery, Dr. Harrison said gently after another specialist consultation, perhaps it's time to focus on making Daniel comfortable, on spending quality time. Get out, she hissed. All of you are useless. Daniel watched helplessly as his wife's grief manifested as cruelty toward everyone around them. The woman he'd married still existed somewhere beneath the ice, but fear was freezing her heart solid. 3 weeks after the devastating diagnosis, Sophia had transformed into a woman Daniel barely recognized. The hospital's luxury suite had become her fortress, equipped with multiple phones, laptops, and a constant stream of employees delivering reports from her restaurant empire. Daniel lay propped against silk pillows she'd had specially imported, his face gaunt, but his eyes still holding the gentle warmth that had first captured her heart. The expensive treatments had slowed the cancer's progression slightly, but everyone knew they were fighting a losing battle. Fire him, Sophia barked into her phone, pacing the marble floor of their private suite. I don't care if he's been with U.S. for 5 years. He overcooked the salmon by 30 seconds. Perfection isn't negotiable. Daniel watched his wife with growing concern. Her business calls had become increasingly harsh, her standards impossibly demanding. She was taking out her frustration over his illness on everyone within reach. Sophie, maybe you should go home. Get some real sleep, Daniel suggested weakly. You've been here every night for 3 weeks. I'm exactly where I need to be, she replied coldly, not even looking at him as she reviewed profit reports. Someone has to maintain standards while you're... She stopped herself, unable to finish the sentence. That afternoon, while Sophia attended a conference call about expanding to New York, she noticed commotion near the hospital's main entrance. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched. Security guards chasing away a group of homeless individuals who'd been seeking shelter from the December cold. Disgusting, she muttered, then called the hospital administrator. This is Sophia Montgomery. I'm paying premium rates for private care, and I refuse to have my husband's recovery environment contaminated by street vermin. Increase security. Immediately. The administrator tried to explain the hospital's policy of providing basic humanitarian aid, But Sophia cut him off. "I don't care about your policies. I care about results. Either clean up this mess, or I'll find a private facility that understands the value of exclusivity." Later that evening, as nurses changed Daniel's floor, Sophia caught one of them allowing a small child to use the restroom near their suite. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, her clothes dirty and worn, her small frame shivering from cold. "What is that doing here?" Sophia's voice carried down the hallway like a whip crack. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, stammered, "Mrs. Montgomery, she's just a little girl who needed—" "I don't care what she needed," Sophia exploded, her voice echoing off the hospital walls. "This is a medical facility, not a homeless shelter." "Security." The child fled, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Other patients and visitors stared at Sophia with shock and disgust, but she didn't care. The world had become her enemy, and she would show no mercy to anyone. Daniel heard the commotion from his bed. When Sophia returned, her face flushed with anger, he looked at her with profound sadness. "Sophie, that was just a child." "A child who doesn't belong here," she snapped. "Everything I do is to protect you, to maintain the standards you deserve." Why can't anyone understand that? But Daniel saw the truth she couldn't admit. Her cruelty wasn't protecting him. It was her way of feeling powerful when cancer had made her completely powerless. Each harsh word, each fired employee, each expelled homeless person was her desperate attempt to control something, anything, in a world that had spiraled beyond her command. That night, alone in the hospital corridor while Daniel slept, Sophia stared through the windows at the city. Lights below. Families walked together, couples held hands, children laughed, all reminders of the happiness being stolen from her. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly alone, even surrounded by the luxury her money could buy. December rain hammered against Chicago's streets with relentless fury, turning the city into a maze of reflections and shadows. Inside Chicago General Hospital, the corridors hummed with their usual late-night activity nurses making rounds, families keeping vigil, and the constant whisper of healing and hope that Sophia had grown to despise. It was nearly midnight when Grace Patterson, 7 years old and invisible to most of the world, slipped through the hospital's main entrance. She'd learned to move like a ghost through the city, following groups of visitors and sliding past security with the practiced skill of a child who'd survived 2 years on the streets. Her small frame was draped in a coat 3 sizes too large, probably donated from some charity bin. Her blonde hair hung in tangled strands around a face that should have been playing with dolls, not searching for warm places to sleep. But Grace's bright blue eyes held something unusual alight that homelessness and hunger hadn't managed. To extinguish she wandered the hospital corridors with purpose, though she couldn't have explained what drew her to the elevator, or why she pressed the button for the 7th floor where the private suites were located. Something deep inside guided her steps, a gentle voice that had whispered to her in dreams for the past 3 nights. Room 714 stood slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the hallway. Grace approached silently, her worn sneakers making no sound against the polished floor. Through the gap, she could see medical equipment beeping softly and a man lying still in the center of an enormous bed. Daniel Montgomery slept fitfully, his breathing shallow and labored. A cancer was winning its war, despite all of Sophia's money and fury. His architectural hands lay motionless on the imported silk sheets, and his face bore the gray pallor of someone fighting an impossible battle. Grace slipped into the room, like a small angel, completely unafraid of the intimidating medical equipment or the obvious wealth surrounding her. She'd seen enough suffering in her short life to recognize it in others, regardless of their circumstances. Approaching the bed, she knelt on the cold marble floor, her small hands folding automatically into prayer position. The words came naturally, flowing from a faith that remained pure despite everything she'd endured. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the machine's gentle hums. "This man is very sick. I can see the sadness around him like a dark cloud. Please, make him better. His family needs him, and he seems like a good person. I know you can heal him because you heal my scrapes when I fall, and you find me food when I'm hungry." Her small hand reached out tentatively, touching Daniel's arm with the gentleness of a butterfly landing on a flower. "Please don't let him go to heaven yet. I think his wife would be very sad, and she's already angry at the world. Maybe if he gets better, she'll remember how to smile." Grace remained there for nearly 10 minutes, praying with the intensity that only children possess, completely unaware that her presence was about to trigger an explosion that would change 3 lives forever. Sophia returned from her nightly ritual of screaming at night shift administrators, carrying a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Her designer heels announced her approach down the hallway, but Grace was too deep in prayer to notice. The sight that greeted Sophia in Daniel's room defied every boundary she'd established. A dirty street child, the same type of vermin she'd been systematically removing from her world, was touching her husband with hands that had undoubtedly rifled through garbage. "What the hell are you doing?" Sophia's scream shattered the peaceful atmosphere like breaking glass. Grace jumped, her prayers interrupted, but she didn't run immediately. Instead, she looked at Sophia with those impossibly blue eyes and said simply, "I was asking God to make your husband better." "Security, security now." Sophia's voice echoed through the corridors as Grace finally understood the danger and bolted from the room, her small form disappearing into the maze of hospital hallways like a frightened rabbit. But as she fled, her words floated back. "He's going to be okay, lady. God told me so." Dawn broke over Chicago with unusual clarity, the December storm having washed the city clean. Dr. Harrison arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, driven by an inexplicable urge to check on Daniel Montgomery. Something about the previous night felt different, though he couldn't articulate why. As he entered room 714, he found Daniel sitting up in bed, truly sitting up for the first time in weeks. The architectural drawings that had been gathering dust on his nightstand were spread across his lap, and he was sketching with steady hands that hadn't trembled once. "Good morning, Dr. Harrison," Daniel said, his voice stronger than it had been since his diagnosis. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Dr. Harrison's medical training kicked in, but his observations defied everything he understood about pancreatic cancer. Daniel's color had returned. His eyes were bright and alert, and most impossibly, he seemed to have regained weight overnight. "Daniel, how are you feeling?" Dr. Harrison asked carefully, reaching for his stethoscope. "Like I could run a marathon," Daniel laughed, the sound filling the room with life that had been absent for weeks. "I know that sounds impossible, but I feel renewed, like something fundamental changed while I slept." Dr. Harrison's examination revealed vitals that made no medical sense. Blood pressure normal, heart rate strong and steady, respiratory function clear. But it was Daniel's overall demeanor that truly shocked him. The man radiated health from every pore. "I need to run some tests," Dr. Harrison said, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was observing. "This could be a temporary surge. Sometimes patients experience—" "Doctor," Daniel interrupted gently, "I know what you're thinking, but this feels different. This feels permanent." Within 2 hours, the hospital's best imaging equipment was focused on Daniel Montgomery. Sophia arrived to find a flurry of activity around her husband's room, medical staff moving with the urgent excitement of people witnessing something unprecedented. "What's happening?" she demanded, grabbing Dr. Harrison's arm as he emerged from the CT scan room. "Doctor Harrison's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held Daniel's latest scans. "Mrs. Montgomery, I need you to sit down." "Just tell me," Sophia snapped, though fear crept into her voice. "The primary tumor has shrunk by 70% overnight. The metastases in his liver have completely disappeared, and the lung involvement has reduced to barely detectable traces." His voice carried the wonder of a man whose understanding of medicine had just been fundamentally challenged. Sophia stared at the scans, comparing them to the ones taken just days earlier. The difference was impossible, miraculous, inexplicable by any medical standard. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I've called in 3 other oncologists," Dr. Harrison continued. "We've verified and re-verified these results. We're running additional tests, but Mrs. Montgomery, your husband appears to be experiencing spontaneous remission on a scale I've never witnessed in 30 years of practice." Daniel emerged from the scanning room, practically glowing with health. When he saw Sophia's shocked expression, he wrapped her in arms that felt strong again, vital again. "I tried to tell you," he whispered against her hair. "Something happened last night. I woke up feeling healed." Sophia's mind raced through possible explanations, experimental treatments, delayed reactions to medications, anything scientific that could account for this impossible reversal. But somewhere in the back of her consciousness, a small voice echoed, "He's going to be okay, lady. God told me so." "The little girl," she breathed, pulling away from Daniel's embrace. "What little girl?" Daniel asked, confusion crossing his features. But Sophia was already remembering the dirty child who'd somehow infiltrated their sanctuary, the tiny hands that had touched Daniel's arm, the absolute certainty in those blue eyes when she'd spoken. Of God's promise. Dr. Harrison continued explaining the medical impossibility they were witnessing, but Sophia heard none of it. For the first time in her life, she was confronting something that money couldn't buy, control couldn't command, and logic couldn't explain. The Ice Queen felt the first crack in her frozen heart, and she was terrified of what might happen if it completely thawed. The miraculous transformation of Daniel's health should have filled Sophia with joy, but instead, it consumed her with an obsession that bordered on madness. She couldn't accept that a dirty street child had somehow been involved in what doctors were calling the most remarkable spontaneous remission in medical history. "There has to be a logical explanation," she muttered for the 100th time, pacing the marble floors of their penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Daniel sat at his drafting table, sketching building designs with renewed energy, but his wife's agitation filled the room like toxic smoke. "Sophie, why does it matter?" "How it happened?" Daniel asked gently. Setting down his pencil. "I'm healthy. The cancer is gone." "Isn't that what matters?" "It matters because nothing happens without reason," Sophia snapped, her emerald eyes blazing with determination. "I don't believe in magic or miracles or—" She struggled with the word, divine intervention. "There's a scientific explanation, and I'm going to find it." She'd already spent 3 days reviewing every security camera in Chicago General Hospital, studying footage of the mysterious child who'd somehow bypassed millions of dollars worth of security systems. The grainy images showed a small figure moving through corridors with almost supernatural stealth, but the girl's face remained frustratingly unclear. Marcus John arrived at their penthouse that evening, carrying a thick manila folder. The private investigator was renowned for finding people who didn't want to be found, and Sophia was paying him an astronomical fee to solve this puzzle. "I've located her," Marcus announced, setting the folder on Sophia's glass desk. "Grace Patterson, 7. Years old, orphaned 2 years ago. She's been surviving on the streets around your restaurant district." Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder, though she told herself it was from coffee, not emotion. The first photograph showed a small girl with tangled blonde hair and bright blue eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such certainty in Daniel's hospital room. Parents? Sophia asked, her voice carefully controlled. Rebecca and Thomas Patterson. They died in an apartment fire 24 months ago. The girl's been in and out of temporary shelters, but mostly she survives on the streets. Remarkably resourceful for someone her age. Marcus continued reading from his notes. She's known around the Montgomery's Crown restaurants. Several employees have seen her searching through dumpsters, though security usually chases her away before she can find much. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia the child, who'd somehow healed. Her husband was the same type of vermin she'd been systematically removing from her empire for years. Where does she sleep? Sophia asked, studying more photographs of Grace huddled in doorways, her small frame wrapped in oversized clothing. Varies. Sometimes under the Michigan Avenue Bridge, sometimes in the alcove behind St. Mary's Cathedral. She's smart enough to keep moving, never staying in one place long enough for social services to catch her. Daniel approached quietly, looking over Sophia's shoulder at the photographs. His architect's heart, always sensitive to human suffering, ached at the images of this tiny girl surviving alone in one of America's harshest cities. "My God, Sophie," he whispered, "she's just a baby." But Sophia felt no sympathy, only frustrated curiosity. How did she know you were sick? How did she find your room? Why did she think praying would help? Maybe she's just a kind child who saw someone suffering and wanted to help, Daniel suggested. No, Sophia shook her head violently. There's more to this. Children don't randomly wander into private hospital suites. Children don't speak with such certainty about miraculous healing. There's something else going on here. Marcus gathered his papers. What would you like me to do next? Mrs. Montgomery? Sophia stared at the photographs of Grace Patterson, this small enigma who'd somehow shattered her understanding of how the world worked. I want to meet with her. Arrange it. That might be difficult. Street children are notoriously skittish around authority figures. I don't care how difficult it is. Sophia's voice carried the steel that had built her empire. Find her and bring her to me. I need answers. Daniel watched his wife with growing concern. The obsession burning in her eyes wasn't gratitude. It was the desperate need to control and understand, something that defied her rational worldview. Sophie, he said softly, what if there are no answers? What if some things are meant to remain? Mysterious? But Sophia had built her life on eliminating mystery, on controlling every variable. The idea that a homeless child possessed power she couldn't comprehend was intolerable. She would find Grace Patterson, and she would discover the truth, no matter what it cost. The alley behind Montgomery's Crown flagship restaurant reeked of garbage and desperation. At 2 a.m., Chicago's December wind howled between the buildings like a living thing, and fat snowflakes fell steadily from the black sky above. Sophia Montgomery had never set foot in such a place, her designer boots slipping on the icy pavement. As she followed Marcus Chon deeper into the shadows. There, Marcus whispered, pointing to a small bundle huddled against a dumpster. Grace Patterson slept curled beneath layers of newspapers and a torn blanket, her tiny frame barely visible in the darkness. Empty food containers surrounded her makeshift bed scraps she'd collected from various restaurants to survive another brutal Chicago night. Sophia stared at the scene with a mixture of revulsion and unwilling fascination. This child, who looked so fragile she might blow away in the wind, had somehow penetrated the most secure hospital in the city and allegedly healed her husband through prayer. Grace, Sophia called softly, not wanting to terrify the girl into running. The child stirred, her blue eyes opening slowly. When she saw Sophia standing in the alley, her face lit up with a smile that seemed impossibly bright for someone living. in such darkness. You're the lady from the hospital," Grace exclaimed, sitting up and brushing snow from her tangled hair. "Is your husband feeling better now?" The question hit Sophia like a physical blow. This child spoke of Daniel's recovery as if it were inevitable, as if she'd somehow known all along that her prayers would be answered. "How did you know he was sick?" Sophia demanded, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Grace tilted her head. With childlike confusion, "God showed me in my dreams. He said there was a very sad man who needed help, and that I should go pray for him. God told me exactly which room to find him in." "That's impossible," Sophia snapped. 7-year-olds don't receive divine messages. But Grace's expression remained perfectly serene. "God talks to everyone, but most grown-ups forget how to listen. Kids still remember." Sophia pulled a thick envelope from her coat pocket, filled with more cash than most people earned in a year. "I want you to take this money and leave Chicago. Go somewhere warm. Find a family to take you in. Never come near my husband or my restaurants again." Grace looked at the envelope with polite curiosity, but made no move to take it. Why would? "I leave? God isn't finished with me here yet." "What do you mean, not finished?" Sophia's voice rose dangerously. The child stood up, her small frame dwarfed by the adults towering over her. Despite her ragged appearance, she carried herself with dignity that made Sophia unconsciously step back. "God told me that healing your husband was just the beginning," Grace said simply. "He said your heart is frozen like the lake in winter, but hearts can thaw if they learn to love again. He said I'm supposed to help you remember how." The words struck Sophia like lightning. This homeless child was claiming to be some sort of divine messenger sent specifically for her. The idea was so preposterous it made her furious. "You're just a dirty little girl who got lucky," Sophia hissed. "You wandered into the wrong room at the right time. Nothing more." Grace's smile never wavered. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to be mean to me. God loves you even when you're angry." "I'm not scared of anything, especially not some delusional child living in garbage." But even as the words left her mouth, Sophia knew they were lies. She was terrified that everything she'd built her life on might be wrong. Terrified that power and money meant nothing in the face of something she couldn't understand or control. Grace picked up her thin blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders like a royal cloak. "I'll see you again soon, Mrs. Montgomery. God promised me." Before Sophia could respond, the child disappeared into the maze of alleys, leaving only footprints in the snow and words that would haunt Sophia's dreams. 3 days after the alley encounter, Marcus John sat across from Sophia in her penthouse office, his usually composed demeanor cracked with something that looked like horror. The manila folder he placed on her glass desk seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "Mrs. Montgomery," Marcus began carefully, "you're not going to like what I found." Sophia's manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the desk. "Just tell." What's so special about this Grace Patterson?" Marcus opened the folder, revealing documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings that would shatter Sophia's world more completely than Daniel's cancer diagnosis ever had. The Patterson family lived at 412 Riverside Drive. The address hit Sophia like a sledgehammer to the chest. She knew that address intimately. It was etched in her memory as one of her greatest business triumphs. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. 2.5 years ago, you purchased the Riverside Apartments building," Marcus continued relentlessly. 30 families were given 60 days to relocate before demolition. The Pattersons were among them. Sophia's hands began to tremble as Marcus spread out the documentation. Property acquisition papers bearing her signature, eviction notices served to the Patterson family, and finally, the newspaper clipping that made her blood run cold. "Apartment fire kills 2. Leaves child. Orphaned, The headline screened from the Chicago Tribune, dated exactly 2 years ago. The article detailed how Rebecca and Thomas Patterson had died in an electrical fire at a rundown tenement building they'd been forced to move to after losing their apartment. The accompanying photograph showed a younger Grace Patterson, barely 5 years old, being led away from the smoking ruins by a social worker. Even in that grainy newspaper image, her blue eyes held the same devastating innocence that had haunted Sophia in the hospital. They moved to the Fletcher Street tenements after the eviction, Marcus explained. Substandard housing with faulty wiring. The fire happened 6 months after they were forced to leave Riverside Drive. Sophia stared at the timeline, her brilliant business mind calculating the brutal arithmetic of cause and effect. She had purchased the building in March. Evictions were completed by May. The Pattersons moved to unsafe housing. The fire occurred in November, exactly 2 years ago. "Show me the parents," she demanded, her voice barely audible. Marcus produced a family photograph, probably taken at some happier time. Rebecca Patterson was a gentle-looking woman with Grace's blonde hair and bright smile. Thomas was a construction worker with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest labor. He was employed by Morrison Construction, Marcus read from his notes. Lost his job when the company downsized 3 months before your eviction notice. Rebecca worked part-time at a daycare center. Combined income was barely enough for the Riverside apartment, but it was clean, safe, and Grace had her own room. The words fell like stones into Sophia's consciousness. These weren't nameless statistics or faceless obstacles to her business expansion. They were real people with real lives, a family destroyed by her ruthless ambition. The Fletcher Street building had been cited for electrical violations multiple times, Marcus continued. The landlord ignored them all. When the fire started, the smoke alarms didn't work. Thomas died trying to reach Grace's room. Rebecca died from smoke inhalation, trying to save her husband. Sophia's perfectly controlled world tilted on its axis. Grace Patterson, the child who had somehow saved Daniel's life, was an orphan because of her. The little girl living in alleys and eating from dumpsters was homeless because Sophia Montgomery had needed that particular piece of real estate for her empire. Grace was found by neighbors and spent 3 days in the hospital for smoke inhalation. Marcus finished quietly. She was placed in foster care, but ran away 6 times. Eventually, she just disappeared into the streets. The irony was so brutal, it took Sophia's breath away. The child whose parents she had indirectly killed through her business decisions had saved the life of the person she loved most in the world. Double quotes, Mrs. Montgomery? Marcus asked carefully. What would you like me to do with this information? But Sophia couldn't answer. She was drowning in a tsunami of guilt, horror, and realization that her actions had consequences far beyond profit margins and expansion plans. Somewhere in the city, Grace Patterson was sleeping in an alley because Sophia Montgomery had destroyed her family. For 3 days, Sophia Montgomery, the woman who had conquered Chicago's restaurant industry through sheer force of will, couldn't leave her penthouse. She sat motionless on her Italian leather sofa, staring at the lake through floor-to-ceiling windows. The Patterson family documents scattered around her like evidence of her crimes. Daniel found her there each morning, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, her usually perfect hair disheveled, and her makeup streaked with tears she refused to acknowledge. His miraculous recovery had given him renewed energy, but watching his wife's psychological collapse was breaking his gentle heart. "Sophie, you need to eat something," he said softly, setting a cup of tea on the glass coffee table. She hadn't eaten more than a few bites in days. "I killed them," she whispered, her voice hoarse from sobbing. I might as well have lit the match myself. That's not true, Daniel insisted, sitting beside her. You bought a building. You didn't cause that fire. But Sophia's brilliant mind had traced every connection, calculated every consequence. If I hadn't evicted them, they'd still be alive. Grace would have parents, a home, a childhood. Instead, she's eating garbage behind my restaurants because I destroyed her family for profit. She picked up the newspaper photo of 5-year-old Grace being led from the smoking tenement, studying the child's face for signs of the hatred she deserved. But even in that moment of unimaginable loss, Grace's eyes held no malice, only the devastating innocence that made Sophia's guilt unbearable. She saved you, Sophia continued, her voice breaking. The child I orphaned saved the man I love. How is that possible? How can someone forgive what I've done? Daniel reached for her hand, but Sophia pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to hold her shattered pieces together. Don't touch me. I'm poison. Everything I touch turns to ash. The successful businesswoman who had never shown weakness was dissolving before his eyes. Sophia's carefully constructed identity, the cold, calculating empire builder, was crumbling under the weight of genuine remorse she'd never experienced. I could hire someone to take her away, she said suddenly, her voice taking on a manic edge. Send her to a boarding school in Switzerland, far from Chicago. She'd never have to see me again, never know what I did to her family. Sophie, stop, Daniel said firmly. Running away won't solve anything. Or I could confess everything. Tell the police I'm responsible for their deaths. Maybe I deserve prison. Daniel watched his wife cycle through bargaining, denial, and self-destruction with growing alarm. The Ice Queen was melting, but instead of revealing warmth underneath, the thaw was releasing a torrent of self-hatred that threatened to drown her completely. What if I can't fix this? Sophia whispered, finally looking at Daniel with eyes full of terror. What if there's no way to undo what I've done? What if I'm exactly the monster I've become? Her phone rang constantly, restaurant managers needing decisions, investors demanding meetings, employees reporting crises that used to energize her. But Sophia ignored them all, unable to engage with the empire built on the foundation of others' suffering. I used to be proud of my ruthlessness, she said, staring at her reflection in the dark window. I thought compassion was weakness, that successful people couldn't afford sentiment. Now I see what my strength really cost. Daniel knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. Sophie, listen to me. You can't change the past, but you can choose what happens next. Grace is still out there, still surviving, still believing in goodness, despite everything she's lost. Maybe that's your answer. But Sophia shook her head, lost in a labyrinth of guilt and self-recrimination. She prayed for you with hands that should have been holding her parents. She showed kindness to the woman who destroyed her world. I don't deserve forgiveness from someone like that. Outside, Chicago glittered with Christmas lights, families preparing for holidays that Grace Patterson would spend alone in frozen alleys. Sophia watched the city she'd conquered and realized that all her success meant nothing if it was built on the graves of innocent people. The Ice Queen had finally found something that could break her completely, the truth about herself. Sunday afternoon found Sophia wandering the streets of Chicago like a ghost, her designer coat incongruous among the everyday people enjoying the crisp December day. She'd been searching for Grace for hours, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name, part desperation, part penance, part desperate need for some form of absolution. She found the child in Millennium Park, sitting on a bench near the frozen crown fountain, sharing breadcrumbs with a flock of pigeons that seemed unafraid of her gentle presence. Grace wore the same oversized coat from their alley encounter, her small hands red from cold as she carefully divided her meager meal with the birds. Even when you're hungry, you share what little you have, Sophia observed, approaching slowly. Grace looked up with that devastating smile that had haunted Sophia's nightmares. "Mrs. Montgomery, I knew you'd come find me. God told me you would. Did God also tell you why?" Sophia's voice cracked with the weight of what she was about to confess. "He said you're carrying something very heavy, and it's making you sick inside." Grace replied with a matter-of-fact wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. Sophia's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the bench beside this child whose life she'd destroyed. Her hands shook as she tried to find words for the unspeakable truth. "Grace, I need to tell you something about your parents," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The little girl tilted her head attentively, her blue eyes showing no fear, only patient kindness that made Sophia's confession even more agonizing. 2.5 years ago, I bought the building where you lived with your mommy and daddy. I made them leave so I could tear it down and build my restaurant." The words felt like razors in her throat. Grace listened silently, her small face growing. "Serious, but not angry. Because of me, your family had to move to that dangerous building. The fire that killed your parents happened because I forced them to live somewhere unsafe." Sophia's voice broke completely. "I'm the reason you're an orphan. I'm the reason you're living on the streets." She waited for screaming, for tears, for the hatred she deserved. Instead, Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching the pigeons pecking at crumbs around their feet. "I know." Grace said finally, her voice soft but steady. Sophia's head snapped up. "What?" "I've known since the first time I saw you at the hospital," Grace explained calmly. "God showed me in my dreams. He told me about the building, about how scared you were when you made those people leave, about how you didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." The world tilted beneath Sophia. "I wasn't scared. I was cold and calculating, and you were scared of not being successful," Grace interrupted gently. "God showed me how your heart got frozen when you were little, how you learned to be hard because you thought it would protect you." Sophia stared at this impossible child who spoke of divine revelations as casually as other children discussed cartoons. "If you knew, why didn't you hate me? Why did you save Daniel?" Grace's smile returned, radiant with forgiveness that Sophia couldn't comprehend. "Because Mommy and Daddy are in heaven now, and they're not sad anymore. They told me in my dreams that they forgive you, and that you're going to take care of me now." The words hit Sophia like lightning. "What?" "They said God planned it this way," Grace continued with absolute certainty. "You needed to learn how to love, and I needed a new family. When I prayed for your husband, I was really praying for all of us." Sophia felt something fundamental breaking inside her chest, not shattering, but cracking open like an ice-covered lake in spring. This child, this victim of her ruthless ambition, was offering her redemption she hadn't dared dream possible. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Sophia whispered. Grace's small hand found hers, warm despite the December cold. "That's what makes it forgiveness, Mrs. Montgomery. You can't earn it or buy it. You just have to accept it." For the first time in her adult life, Sophia Montgomery, Ice Queen, business empire builder, destroyer of families, wept openly in the arms of the child she'd orphaned, feeling the first stirrings of a warmth she'd forgotten could exist. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millennium Park as Grace's small hand remained steady in Sophia's trembling grasp. The pigeons had scattered, leaving the two figures alone on the bench, a broken woman and the child whose forgiveness was reshaping her understanding of the world. "Your parents can't possibly forgive me," Sophia whispered, her voice raw from crying. "I destroyed your family." Grace's blue eyes held a wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 7 years. "In my dreams, Mommy has beautiful white wings, and Daddy builds houses made of light. They're not hurt anymore, Mrs. Montgomery. They're free." The child spoke of her deceased parents with such peace that Sophia felt her cynical worldview cracking further. Dreams aren't real, Grace. Dead people don't send messages. Then how did I know exactly which hospital room to find your husband in? Grace asked simply. How did I know his name was Daniel, or that he's an architect who draws pretty buildings? Sophia's rational mind struggled against evidence that defied logic. Grace couldn't have known those details unless she truly was receiving some form of divine guidance, a possibility that terrified and amazed her simultaneously. Mommy told me that you're going to be my new mommy, Grace continued with matter-of-fact certainty. She said your heart is like a frozen garden that just needs spring to make it grow again. The words should have been presumptuous, impossible, ridiculous. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock Sophia hadn't known existed. I don't know how to be anyone's mother, Sophia admitted, studying Grace's peaceful expression. I barely know how to be human anymore. That's okay, Grace said, swinging her legs from the bench. Mommy said Daniel would teach you, and I would help. We're going to be a real family, just like God planned. Sophia marveled at the child's absolute faith in a future that seemed impossible. Grace, I've spent years being cruel to people like you. I've fired employees for showing compassion, kicked homeless people away from my restaurants. How can you trust me with your life? Grace stood up and faced Sophia directly, her small hands taking both of Sophia's in a gesture of complete trust. Because God doesn't make mistakes, Mrs. Montgomery. He knew you would need me to teach you about love, and I would need you to teach me about being strong. The simplicity of the statement hit Sophia like revelation. This child saw their tragedy, not as random cruelty, but as part of some greater design that would transform them both. What if I can't change? Sophia asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if the ice in my heart is permanent? Grace's smile could have melted the Chicago winter. Then we'll practice together. Every day, we'll do one kind thing for someone who needs help. Pretty soon, kindness will feel as natural as breathing. Sophia looked into Grace's eyes and saw something she'd never encountered in her ruthless business world. Unconditional love offered freely, without contracts or expectations. The child, who had every reason to hate her, was instead offering to heal the very wounds that had made Sophia capable of such cruelty. Your parents, Sophia whispered. What else did they tell you? That you've been lonely your whole life, even when you had everything money could buy, Grace replied gently. They said that's why you got so good at being mean, because you thought if you didn't need anybody, nobody could hurt you. The accuracy of the observation took Sophia's breath away. Grace had somehow identified the core wound that had driven every cold calculation, every ruthless decision, every wall Sophia had built around her heart. They also said, Grace continued, that saving Daniel was just the beginning. Now we have to save you. As they sat together in the fading afternoon light, Sophia felt something unprecedented. Hope. Not the aggressive, demanding hope of her business ambitions, but the gentle, patient hope of spring returning after the longest winter. For the first time, she began to believe that redemption might be possible, not through her own strength, but through the mysterious grace of a child who saw good in the woman who had destroyed her world. The penthouse apartment, overlooking Lake Michigan, had never hosted a child before. Grace Patterson stood in the marble foyer, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, her wide blue eyes taking in the opulent surroundings that could have housed 50 families like hers. This is bigger than the whole building where I used to live, she whispered, not with envy, but with wonder. Daniel emerged from his drafting room, his architect's eye immediately assessing not the luxury around them, but the small figure who seemed so fragile in the vast space. The miraculous recovery that had defied medical explanation felt complete. When he knelt to Grace's level and saw the light in her eyes, "You must be Grace," he said gently. "I'm Daniel. I understand I have you to thank for my life." Grace's face lit up with joy. "You look so much better. The scary gray color is gone, and your eyes are bright again." Sophia watched the interaction from the doorway, marveling at how naturally Daniel connected with the child. She'd spent 3 days convincing social services that temporary guardianship was in Grace's best interest, using her influence and resources to fast-track paperwork that normally took months. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked Grace, noting her thin frame beneath the oversized coat. "Always," Grace admitted with the honesty of someone who'd learned not to waste opportunities for food. That first dinner together was a revelation. Grace ate with careful politeness, clearly hungry, but refusing to take more than her fair share. She complimented the simple pasta dish as if it were a feast, and when Daniel asked about her life on the streets, she spoke matter-of-factly about survival techniques that broke both adults' hearts. "I sleep in different places, so the police don't find me," she explained, twirling spaghetti with concentration. "And I always share with the other kids when I find good food. Mrs. Chun at the Chinese restaurant sometimes leaves me soup, but only when her boss isn't watching." Sophia made a mental note to find Mrs. Chun and reward her kindness, then caught herself. When had she started thinking about rewarding compassion instead of eliminating it? Over the following days, Grace's presence began transforming the sterile perfection of their home. She placed wildflowers from the park in crystal vases, drew pictures of angels that she taped to the refrigerator, and sang hymns while Daniel sketched building designs nearby. But the real transformation was happening in Sophia herself. Watching Grace's resilience, her ability to find joy in simple things, and her unwavering faith despite unimaginable loss, Sophia began questioning everything she'd believed about strength and success. "I want to change my restaurants," Sophia announced one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "I want to feed people who can't afford to eat." Grace looked up from the book Daniel was reading to her. "Really? One restaurant will serve regular customers during the day, but every evening from 5 to 7, we'll serve free meals to anyone who's hungry." Sophia's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. No questions asked, no means testing. Just food for people who need it. Daniel set down the book, recognizing the passion in his wife's voice, the same intensity she'd once applied to profit margins, now directed toward helping others. "The board will think I've lost my mind," Sophia continued, "but I don't care. Grace is right. We have to practice kindness until it becomes natural." Grace clapped her small hands together. "Can I help serve the food? I know lots of kids who are hungry." "Of course," Sophia said. Surprised by how naturally the word had entered her vocabulary. "We'll do it together." That night, as Grace slept peacefully in the bedroom they transformed into a fairy tale paradise, Sophia and Daniel sat planning the logistical revolution of their business model. "She's changing you," Daniel observed, sketching preliminary designs for restaurant modifications. "She's teaching me who I was supposed to be all along," Sophia corrected, watching the city lights reflect off the lake. "I spent so many years building walls around my heart that I forgot hearts are meant to be open." For the first time in her adult life, Sophia Montgomery was discovering that true power came not from controlling others, but from serving them, and that the greatest victory wasn't defeating enemies, but transforming them into family. 6 months after Grace's arrival, Sophia stood before the Chicago City Council, her voice steady as she presented the most radical business proposal of her career. The Montgomery's Crown Compassion Initiative would transform half her restaurant empire into a hybrid model. Luxury dining that funded free meals for the homeless and struggling families. Profitability and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, she argued to the skeptical council members. "We've already served over 10,000 free meals, and our paying customers are more loyal than ever." People want to support businesses that give back. The numbers were staggering. In 6 months, Sophia had overseen the complete renovation of 3 restaurants, hiring formerly homeless individuals as staff, partnering with local farms to reduce food costs, and creating a network of social workers to help guests transition from the streets to stable housing. Grace sat in the gallery, wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, beaming with pride as her adoptive mother spoke about transformation and second chances. Daniel sketched furiously in his notebook, designing plans for the ambitious community center Sophia had proposed for their next project. After the presentation, they walked to the construction site that had once been the Riverside Apartments, building where Grace's family had lived before Sophia's business ambitions destroyed their world. Now, it was being rebuilt as affordable housing with Grace's input on every detail. The playground should have swings that go really high, Grace insisted, reviewing Daniel's architectural drawings. And maybe a garden where families can grow their own vegetables. Whatever you want, sweetheart, Sophia said, the endearment coming naturally now. Watching Grace design spaces for other children to be happy was healing wounds Sophia hadn't known existed. The Rebecca and Thomas Patterson Community Center was nearing completion, its gleaming facade bearing the names of Grace's parents in elegant bronze lettering. Inside, it would house job training programs, child care services, and temporary housing for families in crisis. Everything the Pattersons might have needed to avoid the tragedy that orphaned their daughter. "Do you think Mommy and Daddy would like it?" Grace asked, studying the building where her parents' names would live forever. "I think they'd be amazed by what their daughter inspired," Daniel answered, kneeling to her level. "You turned your pain into hope for other families." The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months earlier. Grace Patterson Montgomery was now legally their daughter, but emotionally, she'd been family from the moment she'd prayed over Daniel's hospital bed. The social workers had been astonished by the transformation in both child and adoptive mother. That evening, they attended the opening ceremony for the 4th Montgomery's Crown location to offer free meals. The line stretched around the block families with children, elderly individuals on fixed incomes, veterans struggling with homelessness, and college students choosing between textbooks and groceries. Grace insisted on serving alongside the staff, her small hands carefully ladling soup while chatting with guests who reminded her of her own days on the streets. She knew many of them by name now, checking on their health and celebrating small victories like finding temporary work or reuniting with family. Mrs. Montgomery called out Mrs. Chun, the Chinese restaurant owner who'd once secretly fed Grace. She'd been hired as a manager at the new location. "The city inspector wants to speak with you." The inspector, expecting to find health code violations in such an ambitious operation, instead discovered the most efficiently run food service operation he'd ever encountered. Former homeless individuals worked alongside culinary school graduates, creating an atmosphere of dignity and purpose that impressed even the most cynical observers. "How do you manage quality control with such a diverse staff?" the inspector asked. "Same way you build any successful team," Sophia replied, watching Grace help an elderly veteran navigate the serving line. "You treat people with respect, give them training and support, and believe in their potential. Everyone here has something valuable to contribute." As the evening wound down, the Montgomery family walked home through downtown Chicago. The city looked different to Sophia. Now, instead of seeing obstacles to her success, she saw opportunities to serve. Every homeless person represented someone who could be helped. Every struggling family reminded her of Grace's parents, who deserved better. "I love our new life," Grace said, taking both parents' hands as they crossed Michigan Avenue. "So do I," Sophia replied, meaning it completely. The ice queen who'd once measured success in profit margins now measured it in lives changed, families fed, and hope restored. For the first time in her life, Sophia Montgomery was truly wealthy. 1 year after Daniel's miraculous recovery, Chicago's medical community still studied his case as the most documented spontaneous remission in oncological history. Dr. Harrison's research papers had been published in international journals, though he always concluded with the same honest assessment: some healings transcend medical explanation. Grace Patterson Montgomery, now 8 years old, had blossomed into a radiant child whose faith remained unshakable despite her early tragedies. She excelled in her private school, but spent every afternoon at the community centers, helping serve meals and reading to younger children who reminded her of her former life. Sophia, at 29, was unrecognizable from the cold businesswoman who'd once expelled hungry children from her restaurants. Her empire had doubled in size. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight as she arranged fresh marigolds on her birth parents' headstones, chatting with them as naturally as if they were sitting nearby. "Mommy, Daddy, guess what? Sophie's building another community center, and this one will have a huge library." Daniel designed reading nooks that looked like tree houses. Grace's voice carried pure happiness. "And we helped Mrs. Rodriguez find a job yesterday. Her little boy reminds me of the kids I used to see on the streets." Sophia knelt beside her daughter, no longer the ice queen who'd once measured worth in profit margins. At 31, she'd become one of America's most celebrated philanthropists. But more important,